So if tax rises are coming and the pressure is on Labour to introduce a wealth tax, what do the millionaires think? This is your opportunity on LBC to meet the millionaire. Daniel Priestley is an entrepreneur, best-selling author and international speaker. Started with nothing and built successful multi-million dollar businesses. Thank you very much indeed for coming into the studio and welcome back to LBC.
Pleasure to be here.
Let's start with that question of where this tax rise, because Labour are going to have to put taxes up, where this tax rise is going to fall, and your, I guess, suggestion of why it shouldn't be you.
Well, I think we should collect as many taxes as we possibly can. The country needs to run on taxes and we have to have public services and all of those sorts of things. The problem that we have at the moment is that we live in a very digital environment. The millionaires are making money online. 95% of the assets of publicly listed companies are digital assets now. So they're intangible. They're databases and they're algorithms and media content libraries and all of those sorts of things. These are businesses that can be run from anywhere. So the issue is that many of the millionaires already have 2 passports, they already have multiple residences, they already spend much of their time globetrotting around the world. So they're very comfortable with the idea of having a home base somewhere else. Mm-hmm. So if a country becomes unpopular or hostile to wealth, then unfortunately it's just not that hard to run the business from anywhere in the world.
Well, I guess the question is what we mean by hostile and actually what we mean by wealth. Because the suggestion that and the lobbying of government that is going on is to say for people with assets over 10 million, they should pay an extra 2%.
So there's a few issues with that, which is how do you calculate it? Because if I raise some money for a new venture and we raise money at a 10 million valuation, do I now have a 10 million asset, or do we understand that that's just a fictitious valuation in terms of it's not realized? The word wealth is a really clever word for the word unrealized gains. So if I have properties that I bought years ago and you revalue those properties at whatever you value them at, on paper, in theory, there's a particular level of wealth that has been accumulated. But if you don't sell those, if you haven't sold those assets, it's an unrealized gain. So ultimately, a lot of the wealth of a nation or wealth of the UK is the theoretical value of the companies. So, for example, you take a massive company like Tesla. If a small number of people on any given day buy some shares in Tesla, they extrapolate that tiny little purchase to the whole value of the company, but it doesn't mean that you could sell the whole company for that amount. So the wealth is just a weird calculation that doesn't mean anything until you actually liquidate it. So coming up with this idea that you have to pay 2% of an unrealized gain makes it incredibly unworkable. How are you going to do that with a fluctuating value that goes up and
down?
Who
decides the value of the house price or whatever it might be?
Well, or the company price. On what given day? Like, what given day do you calculate it? Is that price deflated by the tax itself? So there's all of these issues. How do you calculate it? Do the companies have to go into debt to pay it? And then once you start exploring those questions, you just simply come to the conclusion it's easier to take your company offshore.
So if the reality is that the state is going to have more money to pay for the things that the state needs to pay for, and it is going to have to come from somewhere, you say not you. I, as a non-millionaire, say not me, and my listeners who are taxed to high heaven say not them. Where's it going to come from?
Well, just first of all...
We're being sort of tax NIMBYs here.
Yeah, just first of all this. The UK government now spends 45% of GDP through the government. Now, that's a historical massive high point since World War II. So if you want to know where all the money is, the money is in a massive government that we haven't seen the size of this government since World War II. 45% of the economy, almost half the economy, is government spending now. A few years ago, the government spent 650 to 700 billion a year. Now we spend 1.3 trillion a year. So have things gotten twice as good? They doubled their budget. Have they gotten twice as good at spending money? Or perhaps, unthinkable, but maybe the government needs to be better at spending money. Maybe they need to go from 1.3 trillion to 1.1 trillion.
Well, that's cuts, isn't it? That's cuts in government spending. So where's that going to fall? NHS?
Well, I don't know.
Pensions,
we just spent
schools.
20 billion giving away some islands. We just spent 20 billion on some solar panels made in China while we're also simultaneously dimming the sun. Like there are plenty of things the government does that are just plain stupid. 11% of working age people are getting disability benefits now because they're too sick to work. Historically, that was 2% of the population was too sick to work. Even after World War II, 2% of people couldn't work, were too sick to work. We now have 11% of working age people too sick to work. So maybe we need to look at, do we give BMWs to people who have mobility issues? Because at the moment we give people a new BMW if they say the right thing over the phone.
That's a...
These are real things, by the way.
It is a real thing, but it's a glib description of what is at times a quite difficult set of circumstances for people to navigate to get the mobility support through PIP and DLA.
I'm not saying you don't give support. I'm just saying when a country is flat growth, when the government is 45% of the UK economy, when the government has gone from 700 billion spending to 1.3 trillion spending, maybe there are some creative solutions. I mean, if I had a business that was flat, I wouldn't be giving everyone brand new BMWs. Maybe I'd be looking at second-hand BMWs.
0345 6060 973 is the number. Daniel is here until 5 to take some questions and calls on this issue. Jason's in Maida Vale to kick us off. Jason.
Hi there, thanks. Hi, Daniel. Just wanted to ask you, you sort of touched on this just now, but everything seems to be in spiral, and everyone who is not a millionaire is paying a lot of tax. Where do you expect the money to come from? You just hinted that you think governments need to be smarter at spending their money. But is it really that simple?
There's two things that I think need to happen. Number one is government needs to make cuts. They are too big, they're too inefficient. Number two, we need to get the UK growing again. The UK is not growing. We are going through a digital revolution right now where the rest of the world has discovered that the entire global economy needs to transform around new technology like AI. We are going through a global boom in innovation where China, USA, they're discovering that these new tools and technologies can attract investment, they can create jobs, they can create growth. The UK literally has one of the leading educational infrastructures for AI. We have some of the best universities. We have some of the best infrastructure in London. We have an amazing time zone. We have a city that people love living in. We could have special economic zones that would attract people back here. The biggest issue that we have right now, I've got all of these entrepreneurial friends of mine who are the types of people making $500,000 to $1 million a year profit from their business, and they just pick up and they go to Dubai. And every single time, let's say someone who's making $1 million a year picks up and goes to Dubai or goes to the USA or goes to Singapore, every time they leave, this country loses about £450,000 worth of tax. You're going to need, I mean, theoretically, you only need...
Daniel, sorry, but why are they leaving? But why are they leaving?
The tax burden is so high. 1% of people are paying 30% of taxes. 10% of people are paying 60% of taxes.
Okay, but they're making hundreds of millions of pounds in revenue.
I hate to say it, but people just look out for... The truth is that people are people and they look out for their best interests. So if you're an entrepreneur...
I make 50 grand in revenue. I'm not picking up and leaving.
Well, plenty of people are who are making 50 grand are leaving. There are teachers who are going to Dubai. Yeah. There are plumbers who are going to Dubai. There are dentists who are going to Dubai. There are actually plenty of people on 50 grand a year who like to pick up and go somewhere else at the moment because they do keep more of their money. I'm not saying that it's the right thing to do, but I'm saying people, one of the most sure factors in any economy, as predictable as gravity, is that people make the decisions based on the best interests of their own family before they think about the country.
Jason.
Yeah. I think what you're saying actually hits the nail on the head. The problem is you're making it sound like it's people's concern about their family. I think it's greed. Someone doesn't like earning £8 when they were earning £10 last year. And when it's 800 million from $1 billion, I don't think that's a sum that you're allowed to whine about.
I don't think anyone's whining.
We're not talking about a teacher that's earning 10k less. We're talking about someone who's earning, 200 million less.
And you get teachers who are also going to these places to pay less, to have a better lifestyle, right? So that happens. Sure. But when you talk about entrepreneurs mostly are focused on opportunity. And if a country goes flat and if a country goes into decline, then the opportunity dries up and the entrepreneur ecosystem dries up. And then it's like a magnet for the entrepreneurs to go wherever the capital is, to go wherever the growth is, to go wherever the talent is, the tools, the technologies, the people. So entrepreneurs are like a little flock of birds, and they want to flock around all the other entrepreneurs. So do you know, when I arrived here in 2005-6, London was the place. That was the place to be. Everyone was coming from all over the world to be in London, and that was the place for entrepreneurs to arrive. We want to get back to that. We want to get back to the UK being centre of the world for entrepreneurship.
Jason, I really appreciate the call. Thank you very much indeed. 03456060973 is the number. Am I right in suggesting that the apparent exodus of millionaires, which I do query a bit, there's a suggestion here that the millionaire exodus is equivalent to losing more than 500,000 average taxpayers?
It's worse than that, because if a millionaire leaves, that millionaire, let's say they're paying 500,000 a year in taxes. Theoretically, yes, you could have 50 people paying 10 grand a year to make up for that. But the truth is that 50 people have 50 NHS requirements, and they have the need for more services. A millionaire creates a lot of surplus tax, right? Because the government currently spends about £18,000 per man, woman and child in the country. £18,000. So you take a family of 4, right? You've got close to £80,000 that the government is spending on their behalf. Now, very few households generate £18,000 worth of tax per person. They might do it for one person, but very few households are doing it for mum, dad, and all the kids. Only a very, very small group of people create a surplus of tax revenue. When that surplus leaves, there is no amount of middle-income people who can create the surplus.
Sam's in Enfield. To get back to your calls. Hi, Sam.
Hi, Tom. So this question is a rhetorical one, because I believe I know the answer. So I think that what we need is a temporary reduction in capital gains tax for a short, defined period of time to allow people to actually sell their assets and make that gain. And I believe that if the government did that, they would actually raise a huge amount of money, which is locked up in these assets. I also think they should do the same thing on things like VAT and corporation tax, but just for short periods of time, which is what they do in the United States between state and state. And it actually generates a lot of revenue. So what does your panelists think?
Go for it.
Well, there's one argument, which is that in this country, 9.4 million homes are big family homes with less than 2 people living there. So there are 9.4 million homes that have 2 spare bedrooms or more. And what is that typically? It's a baby boomer couple who paid off their home. They have no mortgage. The kids come home for Christmas. But other than that, 11 months of the year, it's a couple living in a 4-bedroom home. And if you ask baby boomers, like I have, why don't you sell the house and downsize? They say, well, I don't want to pay stamp duty when I buy another one and all of that sort of stuff. So what this person is saying is correct, that people do make different decisions based on taxes. And not just millionaires, all people make decisions based on taxes. People respond to incentives. So we have 9.4 million big family homes in this country that are being underutilized because people don't want to pay the taxes on moving to a different house. So, you know, that is a consideration.
I also, Sam, I know that your question was rhetorical, so I'm guessing that you think that this is all the answer as well.
I think that there are companies that base themselves in the Republic of Ireland because corporation tax is lower than the mainland UK. If the mainland UK lowered their corporation tax, they would base themselves here. Possibly,
but I also think that it's actually fair to say, well, hang on a minute, and I mentioned it earlier, how come a company that is in the UK where the customer is buying that product, it is being sent around the UK, can pretend that they are based in Ireland or Liechtenstein or Lithuania or whatever? That's not right.
That's not right.
Yeah, you would agree with that?
Of course I do. It really sucks. It's not... I wish there was an easy answer to that, but there's 3 problems with this. You can either tax revenue when a sale is made, and that's called a consumption tax, and it tends to get passed on to the consumer. Or you can tax profit, and it's very, very difficult for a geographically limited country to tax a digital product, because if I'm leasing my database off Luxembourg, if I'm creating my brand assets in the Virgin Islands and then renting them back, right? Now, you can say, oh, we ban that. I hate to say it, But that's global trade at the moment. You'd literally be moving in the direction of North Korea because the rest of the world is digital. Right?
But if the main economic powerhouses in the West all agreed the boundaries of their geography, as it were, maybe there's an agreement that can be done on whose geography you're going to be taxed in.
I agree. There's definitely, it needs thinking, and it's fundamentally not right that Facebook. One thing that really annoys me is things like Facebook pretends to be an island while selling British products to British consumers with British ads. But what really annoys me is that at the same time that the government has put an enormous amount of thought into how to tax people for using Facebook Marketplace and for selling a few trinkets on eBay, they've thought about how do we tax British citizens for being a little bit entrepreneurial, and they're not playing the game of saying, let's sit down and try and figure out how we actually tax Facebook and eBay and Amazon more. Because the truth is these corporations are now bigger than governments. These corporations are now more powerful and have more geographical influence than governments.
And the great example of that, it's only a little example of that, but the great example of that is that this country and others have ambassadors to Silicon Valley. We are sending diplomats to the place where they're building these tech companies, such is their power.
All of the government, their job, their secret goal, if you work in government, is that you'll leave government, you'll get a job at Facebook. Right? And we've seen some high-profile examples of that.
And Nick Clegg left. From one to another, Nick's in Mayfair. Hi, Nick.
Afternoon. Question for the panel. Do you think the government spends our money effectively?
Well, all I know is that they used to spend 700 billion a year not that long ago. Now they spend 1.3 trillion a year. They've almost doubled the budget, but I haven't seen double the services. I haven't seen twice as many police officers on the streets. I know that we have something like more administrators working on any given day in a hospital than we have nurses and doctors. I know that the British Empire took over the entire world with less than 500,000 people working in civil servants, but now we have 6 million people working to run one little island. So, take a look at Samsung. Samsung only has 250,000 people and is a global business. I can point to multiple massive global companies that run with 200,000 to 300,000 people that are doing bigger, more effective things than our government. Our government's got 6 million people working in government. Do we need 6 million people? Do we need all those administrators, people dotting I's and crossing T's when AI can do most? KPMG, you're on 600 to 700,000 a year. If you work at Ernst & Young, you're at 700,000 a year. Why would someone leave being a partner at KPMG running a team of 50 or 60 people? Why would they leave 700 grand a year with a pretty easy job to run the country for 140,000 a year? I can't see what they're spending it on. I'm in the exact same camp as that. I don't know what you would cut because I don't see police officers and I don't see enough doctors and nurses. I don't see it being spent. Where does it go? Where does 1.3? Where does 45% of our economy go? Like I have no idea. There's potholes in the streets. Where is this money being spent? And it blows my mind. I know that Ed Miliband runs around, playing ukuleles to beautiful green farms that he's going to cover in solar panels, right? So there's obviously money going in there, but where does this go? It's craziness.
Well, there's a lot that needs to be. I think procurement, in particular, defence procurement, needs massively looking at again because that just seems to be completely overblown. Glenn's in. Is it Storrington, Glenn, in West Sussex?
Yes. Good afternoon, Storrington, West Sussex.
Wonderful.
Good afternoon. A question for Daniel. In your opinion, is our dire economic performance as a consequence of having a government that is pretty much replete with people with no entrepreneurial experience, people that have really lived their lives and their careers have been in the public sector, spending money, not creating wealth?
Well, I can tell you if you're a business owner or an entrepreneur, you are in a full contact sport with reality at all times. You cannot be dodging reality. If you spend money and it doesn't work, you know about it. If you waste money, you know about it. It hurts you personally. It hurts your team. It hurts your budget. It hurts your ability to grow. It really does damage to you that month. And it's a horrible thing if you're in business. You have to face up to reality at all times. When people have worked in the public, in the government sector, they don't have to have that same accountability to reality. If they don't spend their budget, then they lose it the following year. So they're incentivized to spend more. If they do something where they do a bad hire, it's easier to just ignore the fact that they've done a bad hire than to actually address the fact that they've done a bad hire. So they just hire someone new on top of the person that didn't work out. So there's all of those things that don't work. It does help to have people who are entrepreneurial in
But why is
the
this,
government.
Glenn? Thank you. It's a good point, but it does seem to be a particular at this moment in our collective history. It does seem to be a particularly European problem. This doesn't seem to be the same problem in Singapore or Malaysia or China, particularly, although it's a very different system. Japan. This doesn't seem to be the same issue of a sclerotic state with people who don't really know what they're doing.
All of those places have embraced economic freedom, and they've said, hey, we do not want to be a nanny state. We want to let people get on with their lives mostly. We want to run a pretty lean government. By the way, I'm not anti-tax. Most of these governments are about 30 to 35% of the economy. So that seems to be a pretty good, efficient way to run things. 30 to 30, about a third of the economy is government and 2/3 is business. And that seems to be about the most efficient way to do things. The other big issue is that the UK has no vision for what we are. We used to be the head office of Europe when we were inside the EU. We're now drifting towards being the fifth Nordic state, and we're becoming, Scandinavia 2.0. Do we want that? Is that what we want as a country? Do we want to be one of those socialist kind of leaning countries? Or do we want to be Entrepreneur Island, where we are a growth-focused country, where attracting businesses, people are moving from Dubai to here?
Denmark seems to be a perfectly well-functioning state. It's got very limited and low childcare costs. Friends of ours were looking at moving to Denmark, where the tax rate for the work that they do is actually lower than it is here. And the services are fantastic. So maybe there's some mileage in it.
Some people would love to be a Nordic country. That's great. But you are going to have high taxes, and you are going to have people leaving. The Nordic countries do have all of their millionaires. A lot of their millionaires leave. They lose money. They're very lucky in Norway that they've got the big wealth fund.
Yep.
But they are having this problem. The problem is that we live in a digital world where people can live and work from anywhere. There's never been more freedom if you're doing well.
Here's Paul in Yorkshire. Tom, your multi-millionaire guest has clearly confirmed the reason why he and his fellow plutocrats should pay the same level of taxes to other workers. Greed before humanity.
I would love to pay the same level of taxes as other workers. Why
don't you?
Of course, I pay way more than that. I pay ridiculous amounts of money.
As a proportion of your earnings, you are going to pay a huge amount more. But as a percentage,
this is just a total lie. This is totally made up. If, as a proportion of wealth, if you create this fictitious number of wealth and you say, oh, Daniel's wealth went up by this amount.
How much are your businesses worth collectively?
Quite a
What's
bit, tens of millions, right? So we're a business that, I've got a multiple group of companies, and we do, we're successful and we're fast growing, and investors value us as a lot of money.
15 years time, you want to, quit the day job and go and live on a yacht somewhere. You sell.
If I sell my companies today, I'm going to pay capital gains tax on the sale, right? I'm also going to pay
of what percent? 20 odd.
Well, I'll have paid company tax all the way along, right? So all the way along, I'm going to be paying 20 to 25% corporation tax, and then when I give that money to myself, if I pay myself, I'm then going to pay my rate of tax. So I'll have paid 25% at the company level, then I'll have paid 45% at my personal level, then I'll pay 20% when I spend it, then I'll pay 40% when I die.
But you'd be a squillionaire.
Well, look,
so what? So you pay a little bit more, and then everyone else can be happy too.
I get it, and I do pay it, but I'm just saying this whole idea that I don't pay the same as workers is nonsense. I pay way. I mean, this idea. I don't know who's popularized this idea that wealthy people aren't paying their fair share of tax. 1% of people are paying 30% of the bill. 10% of people are paying 60% of the bill. Back in the post-war era, you paid 35% tax on your first pound, right? Every pound you made 35%. The average person, if you earned, in today's money, if you earned $5,000, $10,000, you paid 35% taxes. Taxes were spread very equally. Today, we don't have that. The taxes are on the rich already.
Final thought from me before I have to let you go. But it'd be great to get you back at some stage because the reaction's been good. Why don't we go back to the style of taxation in the 70s? Millionaires didn't leave. They paid a great deal more.
Two things. If you want to go back to that system, then you have to do what that system did, which is 35% on everyone as a starting point on their very first pound earned. No free rate, right? Because that's actually how they set it up. They did have a 90% rate on today's money. You'd be talking about on amounts of greater than $2 million a year. So you'd be talking about 90% on anything over 2 million. Okay, that's a good headline number, but the thing that Gary Stevens is not telling you is that people paid 35% on their very first paycheck, on the very first amount. So do people want to pay 35% and have no tax-free allowance? Maybe, maybe not. The other question I would have is that in the 1970s, could you run any business from anywhere in the world? Could people get up and leave? Probably not. They had
the game has changed.
The game has fundamentally changed. You can be anywhere in the world now.
Really good to speak to you. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
It's been fun.
Daniel Priestley, businessman, entrepreneur and author, co-founded Dent Global and thescoreapp.com. You're listening to Tom Swarbrick on LBC. These are the headlines at 5 o'clock.